Good morning. Thank you for joining us for this month's genealogy program. Today is February 10th, 2024, and today's topic is the Southern Claims Commission. I'm really excited and looking forward to hearing all about this. I don't know much about it myself. So thank you for being here. We always appreciate your support and for joining us for these programs. I'd like to go ahead and remind everybody that we do encourage questions, comments, stories. You can drop them in the chat at the bottom of the screen there. There's a little button for a chat feature. So you can go ahead and if you have anything to add on, any questions to ask, any short stories to share, go ahead and put those in there and we will go through those at the end of the program. I've got a few announcements, but I'll wait till the end. And so for now, I will just hand it over to Terri.
Good morning. Yes, this morning we're going to talk about the Southern Claims Commission. Have you ever heard of the Southern Claims Commission? Until I started working on this, I had not heard of it at all. So you're in the majority as far as that is concerned. In terms of records, the Southern Claims Commission left a very, very small collection of records. And for the most part, these are little known. For some reason, they're obscure and they only apply to a specific set of people living in the South at the time of the Civil War. So for that reason, I think many of these records have been overlooked. But they do potentially contain a goldmine of information. Because these records were filed in the 1870s, they do fill in some of the gaps. And because of the testimony of the people themselves, as well as their witnesses, we get a really good inside look as to what these people experienced during the Civil War. In some cases, there is genealogical information. And also, this is a very rich source for anyone that is doing African American genealogy, because in some cases, the claimants are African American, and in many cases, they are witnesses to the taking of property. So what exactly is the Southern Claims Commission? It was created by President Grant in 1871, and it set up an organization which essentially was carried through the courts, and it allowed those people that had been loyal to the Union, but who had lived in the South during the Civil War, they could apply for compensation for things that were taken by the U.S. Army during the war. And this could be anything from feed, fodder for animals, the animals themselves, food, horses, whatever they might have taken. But one of the critical distinctions is it had to have been taken by the U.S. Army. So what were some of the requirements for people to apply to this commission? First, they had to prove their loyalty to the Union throughout the Civil War. Did they live in one of the quote unquote 12 approved Southern states? And we'll look at that list of states in a moment. They never should have supported any Confederate organization, whether the Army, the Navy, or in local jurisdictions. They had to prove that they owned the property that was taken or lent to the Army, and they had to prove that they had never received any kind of reimbursement for that property. There was initially a time limit on these applications, but it was extended multiple times to 1880. And even then, we will see some that have applied prior to and after these time periods. I mentioned that they had to have witnesses. They had to have 3 witnesses, and those witnesses had to attest to the loyalty of the claimant and to the financial claim. Now, they could have had 3 witnesses for loyalty and 3 separate witnesses for their financial claim, but they had to have a minimum of at least 3. The witnesses had to have no monetary stake in the claim. And sometimes in many cases, they actually stated that they had no interest. Both the claimant and the witnesses had to answer an extensive questionnaire, and we will look at those as well. And to ensure that there was no collusion, the claimant, as well as each of the witnesses, were examined separately. Here is the list of the approved states. And as we can see, they include most of the Confederate states. The claims themselves were filed into 3 separate categories. Those that did not provide enough evidence, didn't have the witnesses, etc., from the very start were barred. Those that did provide the required statements, etc., fell into either an allowed category where they did receive some money for their claim, or they were disallowed. And the commission does give the reasons for allowing or disallowing the claims. It is interesting to note that those that were allowed, when they did receive some money, but in most cases, it was a fraction of what they claimed. In many cases, it was less than 10% of what they had claimed. When I said that it was a small record group, there are only 22,000, almost 300 claim files. And of those, a very small portion, only 7,000 were actually allowed, which means that a significant number, 15,000, were disallowed or barred. It's also interesting to note that it is estimated that about 2,000 claims have been lost. I mentioned that originally people had to be from the 12 approved states, but actually 24 states are represented in the claims. We see that obviously it was not politically correct to live in the South but be a loyalist to the Union. And some of these people actually faced threats and had to escape to the northern states while still holding land in the South. So that's why we see some of these additional states being represented. They owned the land still in the southern states, but they were applying from northern states or other states outside of the claim area. Some claims were made as early as 1864, and one of the last ones was filed or completed in 1900. So we're seeing that, I mean, that's 35 years after the conflict. So who's left at that point? In order to ensure consistency, they did come up with a standardized list of questions to ask the people. The initial set was produced in 1871, and they quickly realized that they needed more information. So they were amended in 1872. And finally, in July of 1874, a final version was established. As far as the paperwork that is concerned with these, only the answers are recorded. So in some cases, you have to compare the actual date of the deposition with the date of the questionnaire. It's important to know which time period and which questionnaire the people are responding to. So one of the first things to look at is the date of the claim. The answers are numbered. So, and in many cases, when reading the depositions, it is very easy to figure out what was the nature of the question. When I said it was an extensive questionnaire, this is an example from the 1871 questionnaire. And they had questions, about where did you reside in the 6 months prior to the war, during the war, what, your residency. They also asked questions about the property and what you are claiming, and can you prove that this property was indeed yours. To give you an idea, when I said an extensive questionnaire, in some of the cases, there are like 71 questions to be answered. When I said that they wanted more information, we see if the claimant is a female, are you single or married? If you were married, when were you married? And this is where some of the great genealogical information comes from. If you are a person of African-American descent, a colored person in the questionnaire, were you a slave or were you free? And by the same token, when did you become free? What was your business when you became free? So detailed questions that are going to give you a lot of meat for the bones of your ancestors. I'm going to pause for just a second so that if you want to do a screen print or copy this information, the questionnaires have been put online by the St. Louis County Library. So you can actually download and or print the copies of the questionnaires. As I mentioned, the records were divided into the 3 different categories: banned, allowed, and disallowed. But there are 3 databases that were created as a result of that division. And there is a master index that dates from 1871 to 1880. The disallowed and barred claims are in a separate database versus those that are allowed. And where can we find these? First of all, it's important to realize that not all of the claims have been filmed or digitized. but those that have are available on Ancestry.com and Family Search to some extent. The master index is on both of these databases. The disallowed and bar claims, all of those records are also on Ancestry and Family Search. But the allowed claims for only 4 of the 12 or 24 states are available online at these 2 websites. And here is a listing from Family Search, where we see the Southern Claims Commission approved claims for Georgia, the Loyalists, the approved claims commission, Alabama. So disallowed and barred cases. So we see that they do have some of this on microfilm that you can view and download the images. Ancestry makes it very simple. They have those 3 categories: the master index, disallowed and barred, and allowed for just the 4 states. Fold 3 does have the complete set of approved claims. Of course, this is a subscription website. It is, if you have a full Ancestry subscription, you do have access to Fold 3. So, or you can visit a local family history center to see if one of your relatives might be listed. There was an appeals process. If a claim was disallowed or barred, it could have been appealed. And those records are not digitized and are not online. Those you have to write to a civilian records branch of the National Archives. And I'll pause here to again, so if you need that address, you can take a screenshot or copy the information. And I mentioned that there were approximately 2,000 files that might have been gone missing. It's possible that some of these missing cases might have been sent for congressional review. And in that case, rather than being held with these other files, they're in a completely separate area. So that would require you to write to the U.S. Court of Claims. They, in turn, if the case, if they do have copies of the case and its information, they will respond with a congressional number. And it's that number that you will need in order to write to another reference branch in Washington, D.C., to actually obtain any of the paperwork that was recorded. Here is a book printed version. I believe I found this on Google Books or in archive.org with a listing of the cases. This is part of the master index. And we'll take a closer look at this to see exactly what it is telling us. We have the name of the claimant, the county and state that they actually filed their paperwork from. All of the records will have a commission number. This is essentially a court case type number that is assigned to them. The office number only appears for those claims that were disallowed. And the report name number is filed for all except those that had their claims barred. The year of their claim is recorded. So here again, that's one of those important things to look at to determine which questionnaire they probably fell under. And the status, we see D for the disallowed, A for allowed, and B for barred. We also see that we have an administrator for the estate of Jesse Howell William. So people might have passed away and their heirs or appointed administrators are trying to get the money for the family. The consolidated index, just like we've seen in book form, is available online from Google Books. It's a very, very long title, but it's an abstracted record. And one of the nice things about this one is that in addition to all the information that we saw on the previous book sheet, it gives a brief summary of the claim. So we can see what the people had taken and were asking for in terms of monetary reimbursements. And this Google Books index does allow you to page through it. It's arranged in alphabetical order, so you can peruse it to see if one of your ancestors might have fallen into it. I will point out that the index is only for those claimants. It does not include the names of any of the witnesses. So if you find that in one of the counties, somebody that you had an ancestor living in, it's possible that they might have been a witness. So you might want to read those files, either the disallowed or the allowed. In most cases, the barred claims were made, did not have witnesses. That's why they were barred. They did not provide the necessary information to further the claim. Here is the listing from Google Books. And while we see a lot of the same information, we also see the money that they're claiming, whether it was allowed and the money that was actually repaid, and the money that was disallowed. And we see the nature of the claim, horses fodder. In some cases, people's homes were destroyed. They took furniture, etc. So it's an interesting snapshot before looking at the in detail records. So this is an example. We're going to look more deeply to the claim. What were people asking for reimbursement on? And we see it turns out in investigating this class that Sally Floyd, we see significant numbers of things. 1,000 pounds of bacon. I mean, who has 1,000? She and her husband ran a store. So tobacco, cigars, corn, bacon, sugar, molasses, flour, ground peas, and candy. But we noticed that her claim was for $3,845, and she received actually less than 10% of her claim. We will see in a moment that in addition to her claim, the tobaccos and cigar were not allowed by the government at that point. So Soldiers were taking advantage of it, but it was not something that was allowed. There is kind of a general order to the files. There is usually a cover sheet that gives you basic information about the person and the date that they are making their claim. We get a copy of the petition. And in some cases, we might also see a front-end summary, especially on those cases that were allowed, why the commission decided to vote that they should be allowed and how they interpreted the witness statements. We get all of the answers to the questionnaires. We do not get the questionnaires themselves in 99% of the cases. They did have to appear before a commission, and in many cases, they had a lawyer to actually represent them in front of the commission. The witnesses, they had to prove the loyalty, and we get their questionnaires as well as those of the claimant, and we get the witnesses' statements as far as proving that the person owned the property as well, and the value of that property. So we'll start with a very simple one, a barred claim for Peter Bertrand, and he's from Pointe Coupee, Louisiana, and he's making his claim on Christmas of December 1871. And he's claiming that stores and supplies for a total of $250. I thought that was $256, but in reading the claim, it's only $250. And he's acting as his own attorney. Here is a copy of his petition. The petition of Peter Bertrand, a loyal citizen of the United States, that he's a citizen, he resides at present in Waterloo in the parish of Pointe Coupee in the state of Louisiana, and that his claim against the United States for the taking of his properties in the parish, same parish, in the year of 1874, and he's claiming 2 horses were taken for $250. That all the items that were taken and who they, with their full value, and that they were taken by the 19th Army Corps under the command of Major N.P. Banks. And they were removed to Fort Hudson. Did somebody in your family serve at Fort Hudson? Was someone a Union man? Are you related to an N.P. Banks? So we get a little insight into some of the other areas other than just the Southern claim. That no voucher, receipt, or other writing were given for the taking of the aforesaid properties. That he resided where the claim actually accrued at Waterloo, and that he is now the present owner. And that the claim has never been presented to any department or elsewhere for adjustment. So he's never received monies in return. We see that he has sworn to it himself, and there are a number of witnesses to his actual providing the petition. In addition, here he gives the list of witnesses that are going to prove his loyalty and those that are going to provide the facts for the property that was taken. However, you've probably seen the entire of the file. It's only 4 pages. To the best of our knowledge, he didn't complete the questionnaire. We don't see answers to 40 or 50 or 60 questions. We don't have any witness statements provided as to his loyalty or the ownership of the property. So his claim was immediately barred. Here's a second claim, also a little bit earlier in July of 1871, for Lucy Moore of Anson County, North Carolina. And she's asking for $150 for repayment for her horse. And she does have an attorney helping to represent her. In the same fashion, we see her petition with her name, where she is residing. And she's the original owner, and the things have not been the ownership has not been transferred, and the horse, her roan horse, were taken on the 8th day of March of 1865. It's amazing to me that people remember in a wartime experience actual dates. And I guess that's the 3rd, not the 8th. But she's got one gray horse, aged about 5 years old, and she's asking for $150. So the horse was taken by men dressed in the United States uniform and said they belonged to General Sherman's army and under General Kirkpatrick's division, that the said horse was taken on her premises. She was a widow at the time, and she has since been so. The horse was taken during General Sherman's raid through the section. No receipt or other writing was given. Therefore, your petitioner proposes to prove loyalty by Parks Beeman, so she's got a witness. And as to the facts in connection, this case, your petitioner will prove by her son, Leonard Moore, so we get a little genealogical information, and by Jefferson Polk. And she's been duly sworn in, and she claims that in the foregoing petition that the matters therein stated are true to the best of her knowledge, except for those matters which are stated on information and belief. And as to those matters, she believes them to be true. Deponent further says that she did not voluntarily serve in the Confederate Army or Navy, or as an official officer, soldier, or sailor in any other capacity at any at any time during the late rebellion, that she never voluntarily furnished any stores, supplies, or other material aid to said Confederate Army or Navy, or to the Confederate government, or to any other department. So, and then we see that she has filed her claim on May 24th of 1871. Here again, it's the sum total of her package. There are only 6 pages. We do not get a copy of the answers for her questionnaire. We have no witness statements. So her procedure, her claim is barred. The order of the files is a little bit different in the disallowed claims. As I mentioned initially, we do at this point get a summary of the evaluation. We see the claim, but the commission also provides the reasons for either approving or, in this case, disapproving the claim. In most cases, we do get the responses to the questionnaire as well as depositions from witnesses. So we're going to take another look. We have Mr. Isaac Smith, and he too is claiming that a roan horse, 10 years old, and a gray horse, 7 years old, were taken from him for a total of $290. And as part of his loyalty statement, we see some of the intricate details of what he claims he actually did during the Civil War. I helped persons to escape from the Confederacy and sent my wife and daughter in the night with my horses to get refugees through the lines, through the mountains at night. My wife and daughter went along to help get other women through and to bring back the horses. I have carried food to persons concealed in the mountains and would get firewood and go to the mill for families whose menfolks were obliged to keep concealed. I helped Joseph Smith, my son, James Corbin, Noah Luthitz, and others through the mountains so that they made their escape. Sounds very promising. Oops, what am I doing? Apologize. I took the Union side. I thought it best to remain in the Union and adhere to it. And here again, we see the numbers out at the side. So this is question number 13, question number 14. I was sorry when I heard the rebels had gained the day at Manassas and was glad when the Union Army succeeded and the Union was restored. I never thought the South would whip. I did not think they were right either. We see his property. I was present and saw one of my horses taken, but the others was taken from a neighbor's place who has since died. The mare horse was taken from the threshing machine on Billy Thompson's farm in the fall of 1864, about the time of the burning in the valley. Daniel Heyman, who was working the horse, has since died, and I don't know any person who saw it taken. I will try to find some of the working hands. The mare was a large, strong animal, perfectly sound, and a good worker. She was worth $140. And he goes on to further talk about the gray horse and the circumstances under which the gray horse were taken. We then get a witness statement. We see it signed at the bottom, Kate Rhodes. And in the introduction to her witness statement in question number 1, she says that she is 53 years old, a housekeeper, and that she lives about 2 miles distance from where the claimant lives. She also claims, per question 3, that she is not related to the claimant and has no interest in the success of his claim. Then we get her statement. I was on my own place, which was but a short distance from the field where one of the horses was taken, and saw the soldiers go into the field and bridle the horse and led him away past my house, stopping there a short time. There was not a great many troops along. There was not any army in the country at the time. Okay, remember, the stuff has to be taken or given to the U.S. Army. These troops were gathering up the branded U.S. horses. It was in the fall of the year after the war closed. I am very positive of that. This was a gray horse. It was one that claimant's son brought home from the army. He was in the Confederate service. I did not see any other horse taken from him, and further deponent saith not. So we get her statement, and we're getting a couple of questionable things here. The troops were gathering up Union branded horses. And we also get that his son was part of the Confederate Army. So we've got some questions to ask. His son, Joseph Smith, also states that he's 33 years old, a farmer, and he lives about 3 miles from Broadway in Rockingham County. He claims that he is the son of the claimant and he has no interest in the claim. His statement, I was not present to witness the taking of his property. Okay. I was in Illinois at the time. I had ran away from the Confederate Army in April 1863 and come home and stayed a little over 3 months when my captain came to my parents' house and caught me there while at dinner. And he was going to take me along with him and wanted me to go with him and arrest some more of the members of our company who had left the army also. But I told him I could not do that. I promised him I would report to him in Harrisonburg in 2 days, and he left me. I then resolved to go north, and my parents both assisted me in getting with my wife, and my mother and sister went with us through the mountains about 35 miles to take us through the lines. riding my father's horses, one of which I had given him, the one I bought from him when I went into the army. There were 3 others who went through the lines where I went. Their names were Noah Luthitz, James Corbin, and a Yankee deserter. When we got to New Creek, I took I can't figure out what that word is, and went to Illinois. Further on in the statement, he, the son, Joseph Smith, says, the gray horse was a branded U.S. Army horse. I had traded my horse for him while in the service. I traded the one my father let me have for another, and further deponent saith not. So who was the owner of the horse? The U.S. Army? And the crowning piece of information to disallow the claim, we see that Isaac Smith was on the muster roll of Captain Joseph Jordan in the 4th Regiment of the Virginia Militia. He had enlisted in December 1861. So he was in the Confederate Army. You see that final piece of paper. He enlisted in the Confederacy in 1861. Mrs. Rhodes' statement does witness the taking the horse, but she also attests that the gray horse was a Union horse. It was a Union branded horse. And in the son's statement, we see that he actually didn't witness this taking of the horse. And he really presents a questionable case as to the ownership of the horse. So we see how things can get switched around. So, Mr. Abraham Johnson, we finally get to look at an allowed claim. And we see significant amount of corn, potatoes, rice, peas, etc. And we see his total claim for $3,519. And he actually does receive 20%, a little bit less than 20% of what he is claiming. We also see that he lost his house. So a 6-room house. So here's the interesting part. The claim is a Negro. He bought himself paying $800 a dozen years before the war. And this is the statement of the commission and their reasons for allowing the claim. His wife and daughters are slaves. He hired them and with their aid cultivated a farm of some 50 acres and raised some crops and owned some stock. The Army examined claimant and a witness and was favorably impressed as to their honesty and the trustfulness. They differ as to the quantities and amounts of what was taken. With that class of witness, so we see the prejudice still. It seems impossible to obtain definite and reliable information as to numbers and quantities on account of their ignorance and their liveliness of their imagination. We take the estimates of claimant's witness rather than his own. Claimant's loyalty is established by the testimony, as is also the taking of the property by the Army under General Sherman in December of 1874. We allow $655. So let's look at some of Mr. Johnson's statements as well, because they are kind of telling. And when they talked about imagination, the interpretation is a little bit different. We always heard the Yankees got awfully whipped, and if the North was victorious in the end, we colored ones were to be sent to Cuba and sold, that the Yankees had horns and would drive the darkies in teams to pull wagons like mules. And you wonder, is this something that really did? Were they told this? His loyalty. I do solemnly swear and declare that from the beginning to the end of hostilities against the United States, my sympathies were constantly with the United States. And I bought my freedom. This is some of the information that is most telling. And I bought my freedom. After I bought my freedom, I continued farming. I bought this property from time to time from the proceeds of the labor of myself and family. I bought my freedom from Lewis Roberts, my last master, through my friend, Dr. Rial, to whom I ostensibly belonged. I am not working for him, nor living on his land, nor on land purchased from him. He's establishing his independence. I and my family are the only persons interested in the property specified in this account. His loyalty. I had a Union soldier concealed for 2 months with an old white lady named Mrs. Cusack. The colored folks fed him till the Union Army came along. Then he came out of concealment. He came to my house the next day and took me to Captain Raymond and introduced me to him as the man who had concealed him. The soldier's name was Mr. Henry Johnson. His loyalty. His properties, and this is his own statement. The soldiers told me that they had orders to take anything they wanted to live on, that I was a fool to fret about the loss, and it would all be made good in the end, after the war. They brought big wagons and took the corn and stuff away. The hogs and cattle were killed in a slaughter pen, which they made right there. They tore down the barn, hauled off the lumber, and left the corn outdoors till hauled away. The potatoes were in banks. They tore them up and hauled them off. The chickens and poultry they killed right there. The hay and fodder were in stacks. They tore them down and took them off in wagons. My horses were there. They hitched them with my harness to their wagon, and our one horse and the cart were taken from my daughter, who they met coming from town, and they took them from her. Let me get, yeah, I apologize. The house and kitchen furniture they took without saying anything. The barn corn house and outhouses they took down and off while I was there. But they left my house, my dwelling house, standing till Saturday. That day I was in town, and when I got home that evening, the house was torn down and hauled away. He's sustaining some major losses. We also see the witness statement as to Mr. Smith's loyalty. My name is John McIntosh. I was born in Darien, McIntosh County. I am over 50 years old. I was born and lived a slave till freedom, 1870. I belonged to Mr. Smith when freedom came. I live in Savannah. I drive a wood cart for another man. I know Mr. Johnson and worked for him for 3 years and a half and was with him during the war. He worked hand and he worked for himself. I know he was a Union man. We were all Union men. All the colored people were for the Union. And he also does provide the testimony for the taking of the actual individual items, the cattle, the hogs, the corn. The furniture, the horses, or the house, and the fencing. So he's thoroughly documenting everything for Mr. Smith. So his petition, and this is the difference, it's 159 pages long with all of the witness statements, etc. He did appear before the commission. He completed the questionnaire. He provided the statements that were needed, and his claim was allowed. By the same token, we see the claim that we looked at initially for Sally Floyd. The commission's summary states that she was married in 1854 to Mr. Henry Eder, and that since he has passed away in 1866, and she had a child 5 years old, and she's now married to Mr. Floyd as of October of 1867. And we talk about her husband's loyalty, and he was an outspoken unionist. They have her complete summary, their findings for her loyalty, as well as her claims. She and her husband ran a grocery store in Tuskegee. So that's the reason for the significant quantities of stores that she had available. And this is where they actually state that the tobaccos and smoking stuff was not allowed. And we have her, actually the commission's valuing of what was taken at $350. She has been duly sworn. and she has provided her witness statements. She has her loyalty statement. I saw when the Federals came, can't read my own writing, backing Johnson down to South Carolina, that perhaps if they backed him home, he would stay there. I was at Tuskegee when I heard of the final surrender, and I was glad to hear of it. So she claims that she had 3 brothers that were in the Confederacy. Matthew Rowe, so we now know her maiden name. Sally was a Rowe. Matthew, James, and Johnny, and they were killed or died during the war. And we see her property statement as well. 300 bushels, corn, numerous pages of her, the quantities and what she maintained. As far as that summary sheet on the front. The interesting thing for this is the witness statement. I often conversed with Mr. Etter about the war. He said we had no chance of success, that the North were bound to win and that the war would only make the Union stronger, that if he was to fight, he would fight on the Union side. He used to talk of great resources of the North and how wrong it was to fight against the Union. The interesting thing, the Vigilance Committee often spoke of him as a Union man, and William Alley and Bat Clark came to me several times and tried to get me to arrest Mr. Etter because that was a Union man, but I wouldn't do it. Alley and Clark wanted him hung. A good many talked of him. So he was not popular, and perhaps if he had not passed away, he too might have had to flee to the North. And we also get the deposition, the continued deposition for the taking of the property. While her petition is not 100 pages, we do get 44 pages of detailed information about her war experience, what was taken, how her husband functioned during that time. She did appear before the commission. She did provide witness statements that were compelling, and the claim was allowed. So I hope you can see that even though it is a small record group that only applies to a certain portion of the population, there are valuable accountings and stories that talk about the wartime experiences, their gains, their losses, their feelings. We have seen a tiny bit of genealogical information, but we also see that the witnesses might be relatives or neighbors and might be contributing to that story. And remember, in looking at these, that your relative might have been the claimant, which would appear in one of those lists, but one of the witnesses And these stories have added significant meat to the bones of your ancestors' story. So I thank you for joining us this morning, and I'll turn it back over to Jessica.
Thank you, Terry. That was just wonderful as always. As you kind of led with, just as kind of being a corner of history people aren't so familiar with. I didn't know hardly any of this, and so that was really neat. And to hear those cases made firsthand in the people's own language is really, really something. We've We've said it many times down at the Royal Gorge Regional Museum and History Center that reading some of these primary resources sometimes can be better than reality TV. But I'll keep my remarks quick, but just to remind people, if you are digging into these sort of things, sometimes that handwriting can be hard to decipher. And you can go to a place like the Royal Gorge Regional Museum and History Center or your local history center, or find other resources out there that can help you maybe speed up the process of trying to read through some of that difficult handwriting. But one thing that you opened this with was talking about Ulysses S. Grant, 1871, enacting this, which is a perfect segue into my announcements, because this month on KRLN's Morning Line, I'll be talking about U.S. presidents who have visited Canyon City, and Ulysses S. Grant was the first one, 1880. So to hear the rest of the story, tune into KRLN at 8:30 on February 15th, and that happens every third Thursday of the month. And then also this month at the museum, we have our community coffee and conversation. That'll be February 29th. That's at 9 a.m. We encourage anybody to come down. We have coffee and donuts. And this month we will be discussing Sally's Paradise and Janie's Chili Wagon. So if anyone has memories about those, come on down. We'd love to see you. And we hope to see you for next month's genealogy. Thank you.
And I'll chime in. Next month's presentation will be on women's rights and the movement. And it will be a live presentation on Saturday, March 9th at 1 p.m. at the museum. So hope to see you all there. Thank you.